Hello, this is Jason Bosch, and uh, I'm making this video. There's going to be a lot of things that I want to cover here, and hopefully I'll stay organized enough to get through them all. But I recently watched a discussion. It was an event put on by the Aspen Institute here in Colorado, where I'm at. It was hosted by the Aspen Institute, but also MasterCard. And it was a discussion between Samantha Power, who's with the USAID, and Michael Froman, who's the vice chairman and president of strategic growth with MasterCard. And they were talking about, the title of the talk was Inclusion by Choice, Not by Chance. Now, if you read the title of that, you don't really get a sense of, okay, what is this going to be about? Inclusion. You know, there's a lot of discussion about inclusion with like the UN SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And there's a lot of discussion in groups like the World Economic Forum talking about, you know, the new stakeholder capitalism being inclusive. But what was interesting about this talk is they were actually specifically talking about Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, and digital transformation. And so a lot of the discussion that happens, or most of the discussion, almost all the discussion that happens around Ukraine is dealing with the conflict between Ukraine and Russia, and NATO and the United States, and it being a proxy war and all of that, which is important and that discussion needs to happen. But I think there are other layers to this thing that are missed by some people, which is all the massive amounts of money that's going into the Ukraine. I don't think is just about this war or even a proxy war with Russia, although I think that's part of it, but maybe not even the biggest part. And you see countries like Estonia and Ukraine as being on the forefront of this global digital transformation in terms of like creating digital states or digital nations and digital governance. And so if you've been following the work of Alison McDowell, myself, Lynn Davenport, Leo Saraceno, there's a handful of us who have been talking about this transformation that's going on, that I will argue is a lot of the things that we see happening, whether it's the pandemic or it's financial crises, supply chain problems, and the war in Ukraine, are actually about steering us into this new digital system that has been in the works for a very, very long time. And there's a lot of evidence to back that up. So, but there was some interesting things that were said in this discussion that I thought were worth sharing. And I also collected a whole bunch of other clips too. So it's going to be a little bit hodgepodge, and hopefully I've got some notes here. I've been collecting clips, and I've been up all night and I'm drinking coffee. I'm kind of, hopefully I make it through here, but, yeah, so I'm just going to share some clips and talk about them. And this is not a comprehensive, thoroughly researched thing. This is just hopefully an opening to a discussion to hopefully further expand our understanding of different things that go on around the world in terms of other purposes for them. So, you know, one of the things I've thought about for a very long time was what is the purpose of war? The purpose of war may not always be what it appears to be on the surface. In other words, there are a lot of things that a war opens up in terms of possibilities. All right, so I'll just jump into this.
Is democracy winning? Is this the biggest existential challenge of our time, democracy versus autocracy?
Well, many of you have seen, first of all, great to be here. We've had an amazing partnership USAID has with MasterCard, and you've helped spearhead so much of that work, and we're going to miss you. Looking forward to your next life, and working with you in that capacity, Mike. So look, I think this is a moment after 17 years where by pretty much every metric, democracy has been on its back heel, and there's been this backsliding.
Okay, so I pulled that clip out because she's talking about democracy backsliding, and this is a narrative that we're sold. It's actually been around since World War I. Really, we in the West are trying to bring democracy to the world, and I think that idea needs to be questioned and challenged. That because if you actually look at what the U.S., the banking institutions, the transnational corporations, and as well as other countries in Europe have been involved with, it's very anti-democratic. And so Samantha Power herself she's the head of USAID, but she's also been a big advocate for military interventionism around the world, in favor, supposedly on behalf of humanitarianism and bringing democracy. But if you look at all the governments we've overthrown, all the autocratic and overtly totalitarian and authoritarian regimes that we've supported, all the efforts to undermine democracy, that's a complete fiction. There's another organization that the U.S. funds, if you're not familiar with, called the National Endowment for Democracy, which again is this supposedly we're trying to help facilitate democracy, but they play favorites. They go into countries and they actively pick candidates. Democracy whenever it serves them, and they're very anti-democratic when the people are opposed to that. And so there's lots of layers. I mean, even here in the United States, the idea of democracy is, more and more I'm just realizing that it's a complete and total fiction. You've got media manipulation, you've got politicians. So you're given a choice of politicians who are pretty much bought and paid for. You have the lobbying groups that manipulate it, and then you have electronic voting machines. You have so many different layers. You have what do they call it? Where they fudge the borders of voting zones. I mean, I forgot the term, but you know what I'm talking about. Gerrymandering. Is it gerrymandering? It might be. Anyway, so my point is, if you actually stop and think about this idea of democracy, you don't really find it in very many places. And I've done a lot of activism. You go to city council boards and these people don't really give a crap about what you say. You have all these people coming in that are testifying, and literally the boards don't care. And they've done studies where the will of the people, or what people want, there's completely disconnected from what politicians actually do. So anyway, so the idea of democracy, the idea that we're here to promote democracy, is a bunch of BS. But what they're selling now is, well, we're creating these new digital systems that are going to remove people and the corrupt people. We're going to remove the people out of it, and it's going to be automated. It's going to be digital. Therefore, it's going to be completely honest. But the people that are building this are completely dishonest and corrupt. So if you believe them, that's great. But there's other aspects to this too that we can get into regarding cybernetics and what are the consequences of living in a world that's basically automated and run by algorithms and machine and data. So there's a lot of layers to this. Anyway, so democracy, a bunch of bullshit. Okay, so let's jump to the next one.
This is a moment where we're seeing some counter trends. I mean, first of all, Russia having launched this disastrous invasion really complicates its ability to do all the other things it likes to do beyond its borders that are anti-democratic. There's a fair amount of buyer's remorse around some of the large debt that many developing countries have incurred, and questions about large infrastructure projects and whether those have delivered meaningfully. There can be some short-term spike, even in economic growth rates, where large infrastructure emerges. That's not surprising. But in the longer term to be saddled with having to pay off interest payments just year after year after year has raised significant questions. And so even though Freedom House just published its report a couple weeks ago, and it showed that sadly democracy still is in decline. The rate of decline is the lowest that it has been in 17 years, and you have almost as many countries showing democratic progress as backsliding. It's one short, so it's almost a draw, right? But these forces are dueling one another.
Okay, so yeah. Again, democracy. We're here. We're fighting for democracy over here. And by the way, in the Ukraine, the United States literally overthrew the democratically elected government in 2014. So look that up. If you actually follow the work of Aaron Mate, he's done some and a few others, but some good research on those particular aspects of U.S. interventionism there. So in that clip, she mentioned debt. And I think that's a really important thing for people to understand, that the role that debt plays in war is massive. I mean, I can't understate that enough. That a lot of people that are anti-war, I don't want my tax money going to war. Well, guess what? Your tax money's not going to war. The governments borrow money, including the government of Ukraine. All the governments are borrowing money from private banks in order to fund this thing. So a lot of things we understand about how the world works, from taxation to markets, are just plain wrong. They're just not accurate. But it's, she was like, people are upset about the debt. And if you look at the history of the IMF and the World Bank and a lot of the key players that are actually involved in pushing us forward into this new system, debt has been one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful instrument that they've used in order to bend individuals, corporations, and governments to their will. And so that's a whole conversation that needs to happen more. But yeah, she mentioned debt, and I thought that's relevant. Okay, continuing on.
When people take to the streets, when young people mobilize, they can change trends and can change leaders.
That clip was important because she talks about when people mobilize in the street, and this goes back to the democracy question. And if you look into the history of color revolutions, there's an incredible amount of manipulation that goes on in terms of people mobilizing in the streets, and technology has played a massive, massive role in that steering of people. Twitter, for example, the Green Revolution, efforts in Iran, were heavily directed. Same one with the Arab Spring. Were heavily directed by intelligence agencies and using things like Twitter and whatnot. Now, that's not to say that there aren't people on the ground that have legitimate grievances who genuinely want regime change. What I'm saying is they're actually being used as cannon fodder. And if they are successful in regime change, they're not going to get the regime that they want. They're going to get the regime that's friendly to these other interests who are actually steering the show. And this steering is really important to understand, that global events have been steered for a very long time. And now there are these new instruments and new technologies that are being employed, and quite frankly, an entirely new economic governance and monetary, totally new systems that are coming online that are going to take steering to a whole nother level, steering of humanity and life itself. So yeah, that's important to understand, that again, this is another myth that's being perpetrated by Samantha Power.
We're taking a kind of bright spots approach, where when there is a reformist opening, not to flood the zone merely with more support for civil society, or, to support an election commission or body like democracy support. We believe in that. We still do an awful lot of that, more of that now than we have in years. but it's the question of the economic dividend. What is the economic dividend on a political reform opening? And so that's where we try to come in with a partnership with MasterCard or with Citi for digital inclusion with you, or microfinance loans, for women in the Dominican Republic that we do maybe in partnership with a government that's just doing asset disclosure for the first time. We're really trying to show that the democratic world wants to come in and rally behind those who actually want to buck these trends.
Okay, so now she's getting into digital inclusion, and you're going to see these narratives of democracy and digital inclusion being merged, being integrated into one thing, and that's what they're selling this new system as being extremely democratic, like that everyone has a voice, everyone's included, digital inclusion.
Tell us a little bit about where the digital transformation fits into USAID's strategy and your vision of democracy and development. And maybe we can talk specifically about Ukraine, which you've been deeply involved in, and what the digital role there is as well.
Well, at some point soon, what I'm about to say about Ukraine, I think, is going to become common knowledge if it isn't already. And probably if I could see people's faces, there's probably more knowledge about what is happening digitally in Ukraine than we ever would have dreamed 6 months ago, never mind, 4 years ago. But USAID, well before my time, invested heavily in something called the Ministry for Digital Transformation.
And the Ministry for Digital Transformation, like how Orwellian does that sound?
And an app, which all of you can look up on your phone, called DIA. And DIA started offering fairly simple services, as many apps that relate to government do. It was Zelensky's vision. He hired the now Deputy Prime Minister Fedorov basically to say, I want state services to be available through an app. It's a state in a box, a state in an app. And they started building this around 2019 with a lot of private sector support and with a ton of support from USAID and Congress ultimately. And it's gone from being able to get your driver's license on your phone and your birth certificate and sort of just the documents that had been, in someone's filing cabinet or, certainly not one-stop shop, to now having more than 200 government and other services available through this app. And for me, the culmination of the success of DIA came in Davos when Estonia, which is legendary, right, for the sophistication of its e-governance, the envy of so many of us for what the Estonians have enjoyed, and the simplification of that for business, for citizens, and how they relate to their government. Actually, the Ukrainians did a handoff where they provided to Estonia the open source code for DIA.
Also, the discussion about, Zelensky did this or Zelensky did that or whatever is BS. Zelensky's an actor. This is all theater. These things were set up well in advance, even before Zelensky took power. And then like even the whole thing of, and then DIA decided to give up this code to you Estonia and the rest of the world. They're open sourcing it. How generous of them. Well, this is all by design. This was the plan all along.
So that's how far they've come. It has 19 million Ukrainians are on it. That's a huge share of the eligible adult population. We basically now have to work on older Ukrainians. The war, instead of setting back this effort, has accelerated it. So now, your geolocation can tell the government whether you are internally displaced and your place of residence has moved. Your ability to file property damages, 500,000 people have filed property damages. Corruption has been a huge issue over the years in Ukraine, as you well know. Now payments to pensioners, to school teachers, to health workers, all government payments to state officials or state-funded workers, they're all visible there, as are payments again to those internally displaced. If you and I think you and I talked about this once, if we walk down the street and there's a building site and there's going to be a ton of building in Ukraine, the permit will be up with a QR code, and you as a citizen get to go look at the QR code, see who the contractor is, the subcontractor is. We, USAID, also funds civil society, independent media, and so forth. You can dig into that and see, is it a crony or is it, hopefully somebody who's, bid for that, in a kind of open procurement process. But this is the foundation not only for digitization and for, greater private sector investment in Ukraine, it's the foundation for the rule of law and the transparency that citizens need to hold their government accountable. So it's the digital and democracy coming together profoundly, really, to change what citizens' expectations are of their government. And just give you one other example, because so many services are, you can start a bank account in under 5 minutes through the app. The cybersecurity protections are tremendous. But when Zelensky has a law that he wants to put before the Rada or a regulation that he wants to issue, he posts it on DIA. And it's almost like the notice and comment period here on any rulemaking, for the United States. Citizens, though, in an instant can go thumbs up, thumbs down, offer feedback. These comments are, even in wartime, taken into account, synthesized, and then the laws and the regulations are adjusted. And there are dangers, of course, to referendum politics. We all know them. But this amount of interface where the citizen just comes to expect the government is going to provide services, do so simply and transparently, and that citizens don't have to wait till the election to offer feedback on how their local officials or their national officials are doing. It's really a game changer. And I should say, one of the most exciting things, if anybody's interested in DIA, so when especially if you see it in your hand and how many things you can do through the app, we want it here, of course. Our system is so complicated. But we, at Davos, gathered heads of state and ministers from a half dozen of these bright spot countries that are pushing a reform agenda. And we USAID are now doing assessments as to whether those countries would like to bring DIA as a global public good that the Ukrainians are offering, just as they offer their grain to hungry parts of the world, as the breadbasket of the world, so too now they view this as a kind of brand for Ukraine and an export that they're willing to offer for free. Now, putting it in and getting it set up and everything, of course, is not free, and so this will have to be a public-private partnership. But other countries, well beyond Estonia, that already has all that infrastructure, who are at ground zero in some cases, are really interested in the DIA menu, and they will start gradually in bringing those services online, but really aim, at some point into the future to have this kind of citizen government digital interface. It's really, it's like nothing.
And when are we going to have it here in Washington for the federal government?
Yeah, that's
after Zambia. Is that it? Okay.
Yeah, Zambia first.
Zambia first.
So yeah, they sell this as this is going to give you access to your government. You're going to get access to your government. But what it actually is which we all want transparency. If the government of course, we want to know where the money is being spent, and there's a serious problem there that needs to be resolved in terms of government transparency. But what this is actually doing is giving the government and corporations like MasterCard and many, many others access to you. And I think that's the take home here is here in Colorado, you can now get your digital driver's license. But by putting that app on your phone, you're now opening yourself up to government having access. Not just, I need to correct myself. It's not just government. It's public-private partnership. So I've talked a lot about the dichotomy between the left and the right. Government's bad versus corporations are bad, and they're one and the same thing. They're two sides of the same coin. So you have to look at the world through the lens of power. Who has power? What has power? And what systems have power? So a lot of times there's just a system that has its own logic to it, and so they're setting up a whole new system that has a logic to it that's very problematic. But so yeah, this thing called DIA. Is actually really important. This is their website. close this. But I've got some more clips coming up about what all this DIA is entailed in this DIA app. There's a whole lot to it. And while everybody's focused on China, they should probably be looking a little bit closer at what's happening in Ukraine, because what's coming here is not going to be like China's credit sources. In fact, it's not even going to be exactly like the Ukraine's either, but it's going to be closer to what they're doing in Ukraine, I think, by far, than what's going on in China, which is not to say, China's system is good. I'm not saying that at all. But yeah, this DIA is actually a really important thing. They talk about rule of law, and the rule of law is actually going to be automated. It's going to be built into the protocol, and there's not going to be a human being behind it. And so there's a lot of layers to this, which are going to create kind of an automated governance system through these apps. Embedded in inclusiveness into digital transformation in Ukraine. So there's some different articles out there that go into this, but I highly recommend people start to dig into Ukraine and the digital transformation. Post-war Ukraine needs a smart digital transformation strategy, and this isn't just about Ukraine, because what they're doing is they're setting these things up in Ukraine, and not just Ukraine, but other places too. But like, these are meant to be exported. The plan is to create interoperable governance systems that are global through these technologies. So again, pay attention to Ukraine more than China. You're being steered. And Estonia was the first digital nation, the first official digital nation. So they're also very important. And then if you look at, I don't think it's a coincidence that, if you look at the map, Estonia up here, Ukraine, and Belarus and Latvia as well. So I don't think it's a coincidence that, like, a lot of these countries that border Russia are at the forefront of this digital transformation. And I can't say I fully grasp exactly how this all works out, how this all plays out, but it's very curious, and it's almost like there's like a digital wall. And I've got some other clips coming up here that kind of hint at that as well. That there's, it's like, you had the Berlin Wall, and so that was a physical wall, but now they're trying to create like a digital wall.
Public-private partnership is at the heart of it.
Yeah, so public-private partnerships are the heart of it. And this is the problem with that whole artificial dichotomy of government versus corporations, or versus the banks, or versus nonprofits, or whatever, versus religious institutions. They're all a part of it, and they're all working together. And so public-private partnerships are key to understanding the mechanisms by which they're bringing all this stuff about, and also how they keep people divided.
And I'd love to hear your views. We've partnered on a number of things in Central America, in India, in Africa. We've partnered with USAID, but I'd love to hear your lessons that you've drawn over the last couple of years on what role the private sector can and should play. What do we need to be doing better as the private sector in order to be better partners to USAID and the rest of the U.S. government? And what do you think the government can or should do to make this work even better?
Well, first of all, the more people we have working in government who have private sector experience, the better, because I do think we talk past each other often. Certainly, I wish in my role that I had that experience, and I'm lucky to be able to recruit and draw that to me, and to have friends and former colleagues who can dumb it down for me to understand how best to partner. But what I know about USAID and government generally, but speak about what I know now, is that the barriers to entry in working with USAID are high, too high. And so we have launched, and actually President Biden has ushered this in across the U.S. government, but I think we and DHS are probably the furthest along, but a debureaucratization effort, a desludging effort to try to reduce the administrative and paperwork burdens that our teams themselves are laboring under. Now, why does that matter? Because you can't hustle up a private sector deal if you're chained to your desk, meeting a series of compliance requirements. And we're, of course, very conscious of the risk of, the privilege of expending, what will be maybe $30 billion in foreign assistance resources, this coming year. That's incredible to be able to do that. And we take it very seriously. And we know that problems in how we expend those resources are going to mean fewer resources. So we have an incentive, of course, to do things right. But we shouldn't understate the risk of also keeping people so shackled to risk avoidance that they aren't in a position, to look out as to who the major, local banks are, local entrepreneurs, the people who actually could come in on the ground floor of a local public-private partnership. And the same is true here at headquarters, where people...
Okay, so when she's talking about desludging or getting rid of the bureaucracy, she's talking about digitization, digital governance, transferring these systems into digital systems and all that comes along with that. And then she also says you can't hustle up a private sector deal. And so this, again, like people's thought about, the left's idea of what the government, what the role of government is, this flies in the face of that. And also it flies in the face of what the right's understanding of markets are. We're dealing with a different beast than what people actually think is reality. But anyways, they're hustling up private partnership deals, and they have billions of dollars to do that. These people are given billions of dollars to make these decisions to reshape the world, and in very, very, very undemocratic ways. How many people are actually involved in these decision makings? A handful. Like literally, there's probably a few thousand people in the whole world. I don't know, maybe it's probably more than that. But anyways, there's literally, like 1/10 of 1% of the population actually has is playing any part in the shaping and in these decisions. And actually, most of the people even within these spaces are not really even making decisions themselves. They're being steered as well. And so, we can get into questions about what's actually driving this. Which I can't say with any absolute certainty that I know. I have my suspicions, but I don't know. But the fact of the matter is there's this new system that's coming online that's totally undemocratic, and they're selling it to you as democracy. I mean, it's total nonsense.
We love philanthropy, and we love when companies just are good citizens in the world, but we really like it when they use their comparative advantage and their business edge. And that is those are the partnerships that are frankly rooted in some self-interest, even if it's longer term self-interest, that are much more likely to be sustained. And so I think MasterCard is a great example of that, because as you've put it to me, every time Mike and I are trying to hatch something up, I'm like, what's in it for you exactly? Let me understand. He's like, look, in the short term, I don't know. I mean, but in general, if hundreds of millions of more people are digitized and are included, I think MasterCard's going to do okay out of that, ultimately, but is it satellite data that's being collected for some other reason that we can repurpose for farmers who are dealing with unprecedented drought? Is it the precision targeting of fertilizer using, again, that same satellite data? Like there are things that are core to the business model of what private sector actors are doing that we most want to integrate into these partnerships.
Yeah, look at Michael Froman. He can barely contain his excitement, and she's like, I mean, come on, like, oh, we don't know, maybe they both know. They both know exactly what this is, and it's about the data. It's about getting all the data, getting access to your data, getting access to you. Again, this is not about you getting access to your government or you getting more transparency. I mean, you might get some of that, but what this is really about is them getting access to you. And it's about this new system of steering. It's a cybernetic governance system that's supposedly centered around equality and democracy and stakeholders and protecting the environment. It's all bullshit. It's all fucking bullshit. Sorry. And again, you look at the history of groups like MasterCard. Look at the history of all the different companies and different organizations that the Aspen Institute promotes. Look at the history of USAID. Look at the history of Samantha Power. And again, this shouldn't even be about Samantha Power, because it could be anybody. You know, these people, it could be anybody playing that role. But yeah, this isn't what they say it's for.
Well, you're speaking our, yeah, I hear people clapping. You're definitely speaking our language on what we call commercially sustainable social impact. Social impact, but it's got to be commercially sustainable so that we'll keep on investing in it and we can scale it.
Yeah, so he says it there, commercially sustainable social impact. And I'm not going to get into all the problems with social impact, but if you don't understand what social impact is, what impact finance is, you really need to understand it, because you can't understand what's happening without understanding impact finance. It's a central pillar to this new system that's coming online, the new system of governance, the new economic system. It's ESG, environmental social governance. And it's a bunch of different things. It's behavior tokenized steering. It's also markets, you know, it's also gambling. There's a whole bunch of different layers to this, but it's not about protecting the environment or the ecology or giving people more freedom or liberty or anything like that. It's not about any of that stuff. So this next clip is from the Wall Street Journal. It's an interview with Julie Chang and Dan Michaels from the Wall Street Journal. And they're talking about the digital transformation that's going on in the Ukraine as it relates to the war, but saying that it relates to something that's much more bigger and ambitious. So
what the U.S. and some of its allies have been doing has been going on for years. It's incredibly ambitious and much more comprehensive than what the Ukrainians are doing. So what the Ukrainians are doing in some ways has even been enabled by things that the U.S. has done in the past. Let's not forget that the internet was begun as a U.S. military project. GPS was put in space by the Pentagon, and drones were really supercharged by the U.S. military. So what the Ukrainians are doing is cherry picking the cheapest, easiest to get off the shelf bits of this and improvising an approximation of what the U.S. is doing, but by no means trying to copy the whole thing. The Pentagon is under enormous pressure to make sure that everything is foolproof and works perfectly. The Ukrainians are doing this all by the seat of their pants, on the fly, just trying to gain a little bit of an edge on the Russians. And given the horrific situation for the Ukrainians, there's a lot more willingness to experiment. And I've got to imagine that if things don't go perfectly, people are a little bit more forgiving than they might be if some hugely expensive Pentagon system doesn't work as it's expected to. Few people we talk to who have experience on both sides with the US, the UK, but also with the Ukrainians say what's really impressive about what the Ukrainians are doing is just their willingness to try things. So the biggest gift for the West in terms of thinking about military technology that is coming from the really terrible fighting in Ukraine is this laboratory that is really being powered by the need to move fast.
Yeah, so one of the things that you can do in these war situations is you can try different things out. You can test different technologies out, and then you can also real world field test them and get them ready for scaling. They love the word scaling. We've got to scale everything. But we saw this for years and years and years. You saw this with Israel and their wars I mean, it was pretty one-sided, but with the Palestinians, and a lot of that was actually testing out different equipment and whatnot. And I think a lot of that's happening with Ukraine. There's a lot of technologies that they're experimenting with and trying out for larger implementation. So I think what he said there is relevant in relation to that. So one of the companies also involved in all of this is Palantir, which was started with CIA money, and Peter Thiel, who's a co-founder of PayPal, and Alex Karp, who's now the CEO. But they've been doing lots of data collection, and they've been involved with a lot of nasty stuff and related to the CIA and intelligence services, and pretty clearly, like, they've been helping with drone wars and assassinations and all sorts of really dirty business. But one of their things is they're building these platforms for digital governance for corporations internally, for governments. They have a thing called Gotham, the one for corporations called Foundry. And so they're building these platforms where they collect all this data and then run it through AI, and then help provide guidance for decision making. But this is actually all going to be for cybernetic steering. It's not an organic, natural thing, and there's pre-programmed, predetermined outcomes in these systems that they're setting up. Yeah. So here's a clip of Alex Karp that was from the World Economic Forum. At the World Economic Forum, they had Ukraine. There was a building that was set aside just for like promoting the Ukraine war, and the technology associated with it. So here's Alex Karp, the CEO of Palantir.
And here you have a culture that is able to perform at a level of any of the world players we've ever dealt with, that is poised to become a real player in technology, and certainly, if I had to bet, the leader of military technology in Europe. One of the things that we've seen is you productize on the battlefield. Honestly, it is a very much of a hybrid of what you would find in American tech and in Israel.
So I think that phrase is really important. You productize on the battlefield. Again, war is really useful in product development and testing. And I think that's what's going on here to a large extent with this Ukraine war. It's about product testing, doing real world scenarios. And because they're at the leading forefront in creating a literal digital nation, with these public-private partnerships is central to what's going on over there. Okay. And also, by the way, he mentions, Israel and the U.S. There's a reason why because it's all being spearheaded by Israel and the U.S. And, there's billions and billions of dollars that have been channeled into the Ukraine. But if you actually understand international aid going back, a huge amount of that is actually funneled back into the corporations, other corporations. The nation state that actually gets the aid isn't necessarily the ones who ends up receiving it, because it ends up being funneled back to these different corporations. So the whole thing's just it's a big shell game. So that's also really important to remember in all of this. But they have like billions and billions and billions of dollars that they can just create to build this thing. And they're talking about democracy. This has nothing to do with democracy. There's nothing democratic at all about any of this. Next up, I have some clips from an interview from France 24, which is I think it's the French state television, with Mykhailo Fedoro, who is the young head of the Ministry of Digital Transformation in the Ukraine. So And so here's an article from Politico. Not a big fan of Politico, but anyways, here they're talking about they're the first in the world to introduce this new warfare in Ukraine's digital battlefield against Russia, and Palantir plays a major role in all of that. And if you again just search Ukraine digital transformation, you'll find all kinds of articles related to that. The digital fight against Russia. But this is about digital transformation. This war is about digital transformation. And so the software DIA plays a significant role. And she mentioned earlier, Samantha Power mentioned earlier how, it's not going to come to the US just right away. They're going to set this thing up all around the world first, because they can actually build from scratch. They're going to have a little bit tougher challenge, I think, converting this system. It's going to be a little bit different the way it plays out in the US than it will in other in like African countries, where they kind of have a clean slate and they can just like use the government to push everybody onto it. They'll have different tactics for pulling people into the system, but you remember it's interoperable. So people are going to think they're in some sort of alternate, independent, free coin or whatever system, but it's actually going to be pulling them into the same system ultimately, because it's all interoperable. Here's an article from USAID. A US-supported e-government app accelerated the digital transformation of Ukraine. Now Ukraine is working to scale the solution to more countries. So again, this is Ukraine is a test bed for these things, but the plan is for them to go everywhere. And again, this is the USAID. It's not Zelensky. Zelensky wants to scale this to more countries. Zelensky's just a figurehead. It's not about Zelensky. So they tend to do that. They like to get everybody focused on some individual, but these people are interchangeable. Estonia, it's actually, you could become a digital citizen of Estonia. I'm not sure what they ask for, but I think I think it's pretty open. Like if you want to become an e-citizen of Estonia, I think there's some opportunity there. Here's an article. Estonia built one of the world's most advanced digital societies during COVID-19 that became a lifeline. So what's going on in these countries, these former Russian bloc, Eastern Bloc countries, with regard to digitization is really, really important, that people need to actually start paying attention to.
We had four main tasks: to digitalize all public services, to connect 95% of the population to the internet, to develop the IT economy, the digital economy, and to teach people computer literacy. And indeed, during the war, we put all of these tracks onto a war footing.
Yeah, so the takeaway here is they put it all onto a war footing. And by putting it onto a war footing, it gives them lots and lots of leeway to implement things that maybe would not be popular or accepted in other circumstances. And, something that I learned from someone who I'm not impressed with anymore, but I used to be a big fan of, Naomi Klein, because she wrote The Shock Doctrine, which I still think is a really great book. But unfortunately, she's actually, I've discovered, part of the problem in that she's promoting a lot of the very things that we should be against. But she wrote about The Shock Doctrine, in that this idea that you can't, you need a crisis. Milton Friedman promoted this idea that you need a crisis in order to implement these new things. And war is, what bigger crisis than war? But of course, that's not the only crisis that they've been utilizing in order to bring forward this undemocratic digital transformation.
We are now creating a kind of digital blockade of the Russian Federation, working with tech companies from all over the world to get them to leave Russia. And often that means they move their business to Ukraine.
Okay, so digital blockade, I think that's another really important framing. So the idea that they can blockade countries, maybe blockade corporations, or even blockade individuals digitally, through this technology. And again, so I think they're testing a lot of this stuff out there that's going to be applied to the rest of the world.
Thanks to our DIA app, which has verified users, we created a chatbot that works with DIA so we can check its users are genuine, that allows people to send information about the movements of the Russian army, concentrations of their forces, where there are traitors, any information that can help our military. And thanks to that, we obtain quality information, which we sort and send to all the relevant entities. We've received more than 30,000 messages, and that means photos and videos and detailed descriptions, so it's a lot of information.
Yeah, think about the dual use case here. So this is an app that allows citizens to provide information, photos, video, basically alerting, in this scenario, alerting the government to Russian movement or Russian advancement or whatever. But think about other case scenarios where that technology can be used.
You don't want to specify which technology exactly is being used for facial recognition. Why?
We have certain agreements with different companies that mean we can announce that we started working together. With some of them we can, with others not. But let's put it this way, in the situations that it's being used, I think it's best not to announce it publicly. There were cases where we used it to find the marauders of Bucha and other places in Kyiv and Chernihiv regions. When the system recognizes a face, it gives you the confidence ratio, 70, 80, 95% resemblance. And of course, there are other tools to check it with. Mostly you can check via the social networks. You can see there, for example, that it is a soldier, and some information that can allow you to confirm the identity. There are times when we check, but we can't feel sure that the information is confirmed. And there it requires more work, and support systems have to work.
Yeah, so this is going into facial recognition, which there's a lot of emphasis put on facial recognition as it relates to China, but it is an important thing. And in this particular case, he says, I can't tell you what it's being used for it, but clearly what it's being used for. And then he kind of, in a roundabout way, kind of admits that or implies that it's being used for assassination, which is, I'm sure what's going on, that they're using it to target people for assassination by drone, most likely. Which, by the way, is a crime. It's an international crime. But beyond international crime, I don't give a shit about international crime, because the International Criminal Court's a bunch of bullshit too. They cherry pick who they prosecute. But I would argue it's a crime against humanity, not in a legal sense, but in a moral sense. And yeah, it just kind of blows my mind how many people are just completely morally devoid of conscience, because these things are so profoundly unethical, and yet they're telling us that they're going to build this inclusive, just, regenerative system. It's insane.
We use artificial intelligence for face recognition. There are various services. When photos appear of Russian soldiers who died, we can find their pages on social media and contact their loved ones and tell them about the death, so they collect the body. Generally, you can identify the person.
So this is just kind of a side thing in terms of like my central point about the digital transformation, but it is something that I think is relevant in terms of like the ethics of this thing, because I mean the primary purpose of digital facial recognition is not so they can identify Russian soldiers, so they can alert the family, which I'm not saying that they're not doing that, but I mean that's not what it's actually being used for.
Has it happened that there's been a case of mistaken identity that you know of?
У нас ще не було кейсів з помилкою, які ми впевнені, що була помилка. У нас
We haven't had any cases of mistaken identity,
Okay, so that's total bullshit, but
or where we're sure there was a mistake. On the other hand, there was a case when volunteers came to us with a request to identify a person that was in hospital and had lost their memory. We identified them, and it turned out it was a Russian soldier who was just trying to fool everyone by saying he'd lost his memory.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. And
Yes, this was a real case.
And so then was that person taken prisoner? Where are they now?
I don't know where he is now, but I think he's where he deserves to be.
Де повинен бути.
that guy's most likely dead. The Ukrainians have been committing all sorts of crimes against, war crimes. And by the way, I'm not saying that I'm in support of Putin or Russian. You know, I think they're all criminals. I'm actually opposed to the Russian government, Putin, as well as the Ukrainian government, as well as NATO, as well as the United States government in this situation, because they're all bad players. Like, there are no good players. But it is valuable to actually understand what led up to this thing and the narratives that people are being told that are actually not accurate in terms of when and how this all started and why. The next couple of clips are from a panel. It came from the Ukraine House of Davos. So this was in Davos, and this is in Davos like 3 months ago. It was a bunch of mayors talking about digital transformation as it relates to sustainability. So the title of the talk was From Urgent to Sustainable, Rebuilding Cities in Ukraine. And this is Andrei Sadovyi, if I'm saying that correctly. And he's the mayor of the city of Lviv. And so the voice you hear is actually the translator. It's not him. So just so that make sure that doesn't throw you off.
People who were innocent but were killed, you understand that they make this land holy with their sacrifice, and holy land has special energy. Very few people appreciate that in the world, and we can be a beacon for the entire world, the world which is very complex, which is at the crossroads, and we discussed all of that over these days in Davos. We will build on this sacrifice of the people. We will go to a higher level, but it is doable. Together we can do that.
Хіба таку націю можна перемогти?
This nation is invincible. Never will we give up.
Okay, so the reason why I picked that clip was because these people that are, so scientific, they're bringing us into the, 21st century, and they have all this technology and everything. They still have all these barbaric ideas. The people that are building this and pushing this forward have a lot of barbaric ideas about life and human beings and respect for life. And I think that those ideas that this guy has are ancient and barbaric. And, so I thought that was a relevant thing. And they're lunatics, we will, you always hear this, we're going to fight to the last Ukrainian. Now, I'm for the Ukrainian people. I'm for the Russian people. I'm for people. But these mayors, these governors, these presidents, these heads of corporations, these heads of banks, these people that are in these institutions are, at best, they're sociopaths. And I don't necessarily think that they're like overtly lying. I think they're lying to themselves about this too. I don't know. It's just mind blowing to me to hear these things. Here's another mayor from the same panel.
We are ready to prepare such people. We work in this case also with Denmark and other partners to prepare workforce, because Ukraine will be the big market after the war, big market of the goods, big market of workforce, and we need to be prepared now while this war.
And we need to have people to live there and to come back to Ukraine for this to ensure that it's a market.
So yeah, that that clip is really important too to understand, because they're talking about the labor market. You know, we have a lot of human capital here, and human labor capital, and that's what a lot of this whole thing is. And they talk about markets. We're not talking about like an organic thing. It's a steered, guided, directed thing. Everything from all the billions of dollars that have been created to manufacture this situation, to even these new markets that are going to be steered and guided by these digital protocols that are going to be largely automated. So the next clips I have are from this thing called Digital Ukraine. It's called DevFest for Ukraine 2022, and it happened, I think, in maybe December. And this is Mykhailo Fedoro, again, the Minister of Digital Transformation of Ukraine, and he's explaining about this software, this app, DIA, and all the different aspects to it. So I've got several different clips here where he goes into detail about all the different aspects of the app. And just keep in mind as they're talking about this, that these technologies are meant to be implemented elsewhere. Again, it's open source, and we're giving it away because we care so much.
We have one of the best government apps in the world, DIA. Here you can store digital documents, pay taxes, donate to the army, and even watch TV. Over the past 2 years, our team has launched 12 digital documents in the app DIA: driver license, student card, vehicles registration, and insurance. And the most important of them is a digital passport of the citizen of Ukraine that has the same legal power as the paper one. This way, we became the first country in the world to legalize electronic passport.
2 years ago, we created a digital passport in a smartphone, a document one should not leave at home. Ukraine is the first country in the world to equate a digital passport with a physical one. Having a digital passport in DIA, Ukrainians can open bank accounts, receive money transfers, pick up postal packages, board trains and planes within Ukraine, etc. Using digital passport in DIA is secure and reliable. You can check its validity with the help of a QR code in the application. This feature is available for any DIA user. We got rid of endless paper trail, certified by handwritten signatures. In 2 simple clicks, Ukrainians are able to use certified copies of their important documents in institutions and even when checking into a hotel. The documents are stored in PDF format and have a date and notice from organization that had received it. DIA. Simple, invisible, humane.
Yeah, so digital passport, and in order to get access. And then next they talk about the digital. The next piece talks about digital signature.
A very important part of digital country is a digital signature. That is why we have launched DIA Signature. It's a revolutionary service. You can create the electronic signature right in your smartphone without attending office state or private offices. How it works? We use Bank ID for authorization in DIA, and when you are creating the DIA signature, your face biometrics are matched with the biometrics of the demographic register in real time. It's amazing. 8 million of Ukrainians have already used it.
DIA Digital Signature is a secure signature on your smartphone. To generate a DIA digital signature, simply open DIA application and click on DIA Digital Signature menu and blink your eyes. The image of your face is then verified with the photo in the database. Using such digital signature, people are able to sign contracts and open bank accounts online. The application is storing all signing history. Your digital signature is simply in your pocket.
Yeah, so digital signature, digital passport, biometric data in order to get access to society. So you see where this is going.
All this time we have been transforming our economy. We have launched a special law and tax regime for tech companies, DIA City. It's the best tax conditions for IT companies in Europe. As of now, we have the following achievements: 255 residents in DIA City since its launch in the beginning of February. So, 20,000 of people work within the DIA City framework. Ukrainian budget has already received 1.3 billion hryvnias of taxes from resident companies. In addition to create favorable tax conditions, Ukraine has legalized virtual assets and crypto exchanges. In 2020, we launched the Ukrainian Startup Fund, which became the biggest angel venture fund in Ukraine.
Space. It can be so unbearably little and so terrifyingly vast, you get goosebumps. Usually it is a good sign. It means room for growth. IT business in Ukraine needs space to keep developing and operating. So we created DIA City, an exclusive economical and legal outlet for IT. Here you will not find outdated schemes, gray areas, constant battles between what is legal or profitable. There is breathing space. Legal tools are the same for London and Venetia, and intellectual property is protected by law. People are able to control their contracts and receive social guarantees. Law enforcement structures are incapable of acting in their sole interests. Here, taxes are not pressing, and you get headroom for reinvestments, new Ukrainian businesses, and large international companies. This is space for Sergei, Volodymyr, Anya, Nazar, and this guy. Join in.
So DIA City, that's taxation and digital assets, digital government, and smart contracts, things like that, and automated smart contracts. That's really what that's about. Creating the legal. It's what's that? So yeah, DIA City. What that's doing is creating a framework for their smart contracts. Dealing with taxation and virtual assets. It's actually an expansion, a massive expansion. Not just that, but there are other aspects to this new system coming on, which is a massive expansion of intellectual property and virtual property. So like people always said, like, this is the late stage of capitalism. Like, no, this is actually capitalism is just getting started. But it's not just capitalism. Capitalism is one layer, one piece of it, but it's actually a massive expansion of those ideas around ownership. They say you own nothing, but that's not actually accurate. It's you're going to own your own data. If you think about the messaging that's coming out even from the World Economic Forum, you will own nothing, but you'll own your own data. Like, so just look at the incongruencies here in all these things. Now, when they say you will own nothing, what they're really talking about, we're moving into a more subscription model. We're all going to be subscribers and renters for the most part, but we'll own our own data. Like, that's the one thing that we are going to get to own, but we're not going to have any resources, so we're going to be forced to sell it, or we won't get access if we don't sell it or give up our data. So it's kind of a joke. The whole you're going to own your own data is fucking nonsense.
And then the war started. For the first time in history, there is a cybersecurity, digital and informational war, as well as a war in the fields. For the last 2.5 years, we have been creating the digital country, the products and approaches of which we could adapt for leading the digital war. Let's see what we managed to do in the field of the government services during the war.
As a result of the war, almost 11 million Ukrainians fled their homes. 7 million of them are internally displaced. It takes a minute for Ukrainians to apply for an IDP status certificate in DIA. Ukrainians can also submit an application for IDP assistance in DIA app as well. Ukrainian government sending payments to help our people during 3 months. The Russian military have destroyed tens of thousands of homes of civil people. Damaged property feature was created to track damages as accurately as possible. Ukrainians are able to report complete or partial damage to their private homes and residential properties. When Ukrainians had to be evacuated from hotspots, they had left behind everything they had earned throughout their lives. we updated e-aid service. There is a one-time financial assistance from the government to evacuated people. On the first day of this feature, we have received 1 million applications. When the Russian army attacked Ukraine, it destroyed a number of TV towers. In order to provide Ukrainians with uninterrupted access to information, Dia TV and Dia Radio were created in the Dia app. Using this feature, the population follows all the news and even had watched Eurovision recently. The Bayraktar drone became a symbol of Ukrainian resistance. The game e-Bayraktar was created in Dia to lighten the mood of the Ukrainians. Everyone can experience being an operator of the legendary drone.
Yeah, so e-aid, I think that's the main key there is they create these humanitarian crises. And again, this is not just Russia. Like this whole thing was, I will argue that this was all planned out. Like they baited Russia into the invasion, and I think they had all these things put into place ahead of time. But you get, you break it and then you can come in and fix it. So e-aid, there's going to be all these humanitarian crises that then you can take advantage of. So I know Allison has done a lot of work on particularly like the refugees and how they were test subjects for like biometrics and a lot of the apps that are being rolled out. So yeah, that e-aid is another aspect of the Dia app.
Dia users contribute to Ukrainian victory by sharing civil intelligence data. Everyone who sees the movements of Russian army or military hardware could take the photos of it and send it to us using his special chatbot eVoro.
From the first days of the invasion, Ukraine showed mastery on the digital front. Team at Ministry of Digital Transformation created a chatbot, Yevorog, e-enemy, in the Telegram Messenger. With this chatbot, Ukrainians can report the movement of occupants and collaborators and capture the location of enemy equipment with just a few clicks. The main difference from all other existing bots is authorization through Dia app. Only citizens of Ukraine are able to use the bot. Support service at Dia processes applications and submits them to the headquarters of Armed Forces of Ukraine. Brave Ukrainians help Ukrainian military to destroy entire troops of occupants. Chatbot has become a digital weapon of every Ukrainian in occupied territories.
So yeah, Evorog, e-enemy. But you have an app like that. Think about other uses for that. You have this, you can put something out and declare that this person is the enemy and get a whole group of people. I think about the Pokemon Go thing that was created actually by the CIA and Niantic, where they had, oh, there's a Pokemon, go take a picture of it. But this is kind of a similar thing where like, oh, it's the Russian soldier, or in the future, oh, it's someone that's not wearing their mask or something like that. So it could be anything, but the idea is getting people to spy for whatever purpose, and anyway, so there's that. E-enemy. So again, this Dia app has a lot of different things, a lot of different elements to it.
During COVID-19 crisis, we learned how to make target payments into virtual bank accounts of Ukrainians in just a few clicks. Dia automatically recognized whether an applicant suited the requirements of vaccination or not to make a decision about the payment. This money could only be used for purchasing particular kinds of goods and services, and thus we managed to recreate the e-money using regular digital instruments. It's revolutionary for target social payments.
E-aid, government payments in Dia app. The Ministry of Digital Transformation has completely changed the approach to social assistance. People were able to send in their applications in a few clicks on Dia app. Their information was taken from databases, and the system determined their eligibility for these services. As a result, they only needed to verify their data on Dia and choose the account. Payments were released on special cards. This was the largest online social service in the history of Ukraine. We managed to simplify and speed up the process for people as much as possible. This service is expanding. When the war began, it started being available to Ukrainians who had to move away from hostile territories. In the future, all social assistance Ukrainians will receive through e-aid.
So EA, your welfare, your benefit, pay, Social Security, eventually it could be UBI payments or whatever, are all through this app, and they can come with stipulations and behavioral compliance. There's a lot of different things. I think he said at the beginning, something about. Let me go back.
During COVID-19 crisis, we learned how to make target payments into virtual bank accounts of Ukrainians in just a few clicks. They automatically recognized whether an applicant suited the requirements of vaccination or not to make a decision about the payment.
So he says, and at the beginning there, he says, the app was able to determine whether or not the person had gotten their vaccine in order to whether or not they're eligible to receive the payment. So think about that for a minute. Think about how that can be used in all the different ways that can be used for your compliance. And if you talk to people that are on public assistance, there's all sorts of hoops that they have to jump through. And this is that being automated. So now you're not going to get your payment if you don't meet all the compliance guidelines.
Donations this sphere we also digitized and made simple, convenient and fast. We have initiated the first state crypto fund. You can donate in any cryptocurrency or NFT. It has already raised over $60 million in crypto. All funds goes to military and humanitarian relief efforts. That is something the world hasn't seen before. We are not afraid of crypto and having fun. Just look at that.
Invest in peace, bro. That's what we do. Invest in peace, bro. It feels so good. Invest in peace, bro. That's what we do. Invest in peace, bro. It feels so good.
So yeah, Allison talks a lot about how there's too much emphasis put on crypto, and this is really about the smart contract layer. And I think she's correct about that. But crypto is also playing a role in helping to facilitate some of these things. And one of the things that it's done, particularly in relation to the Ukraine, was it was able to channel and funnel even more money from people that actually believed the narrative and thought that this was some sort of righteous fight or something to funnel that money in there. And another thing about this, invest in peace. And they do this cutesy, really stupid video, but for like, oh, that's so hip. Invest in peace. I wanted to say something. I'm going to do a little rant here. So on the peace thing, I want to just do a little rant here. I've been a huge Pink Floyd fan since I was a little kid. I love Pink Floyd. And I love David Gilmour. His guitar playing he's an amazing guitarist. I love his music. And actually, like, I would say a lot of my political understandings for the world are my first political awakenings and conscious awakenings about the larger world. I can honestly attribute to Roger Waters, because I was listening to Pink Floyd lyrics, and a lot of those lyrics were making me think. And I think that had a lot to do with my development and my becoming someone that supports peace. And there's someone that I've been a big supporter of. He passed away several years ago, but his name is Dr. Gino Strada. He's an Italian war surgeon. He co-founded an organization called Emergency out of Italy. And what they do is they provide free of charge, first world standard medical care to civilian victims of war and poverty. And I don't really have heroes, but he's the closest thing to a hero I have. He's a badass, or he was a badass. And I actually got the opportunity to meet him several times. I hosted some events for him here in Colorado back in 2005. And then I think again in 2006 or 7, I can't remember exactly, but I got to know him, not well, but I got to know Gino Strada, and interestingly enough, he ended up doing some concerts. Interestingly enough, Pink Floyd with David Gilmour, ended up doing a concert for Emergency to raise money in St. Mark's Square, and then Roger Waters also did a concert for Emergency also in St. Mark's Square. So Pink Floyd has been a big influence on me, and Gino Strada has also been a big influence on me. And one of the things about Emergency that stands out that's different than your typical NGO is they were adamantly against war, and they weren't political. They didn't take sides. They're like, we're here to treat the victims, and Gino was very outspoken about how the victims of war, 90% are civilians, and that there is no just war. And actually, there was an event with Howard Zinn and Gino Strada that happened in LA. I think it's on YouTube. You can find it. And Zinn even wrote a short little book called Just War. But it was inspired largely by Emergency and Dr. Gino Strada. So David Gilmour knows who Gino Strada is and knows what, should know better. Well, apparently David Gilmour, he's got his, I don't know if it's he's got an in-law that's Ukrainian, and last year, it was about a year ago, Pink Floyd put their name and put out the song "Hey Hey Rise Up," and it's a Ukrainian. If you watch the video, it's on YouTube. It's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. It's like a really poorly produced war propaganda. And I've watched interviews with him, saying, he's for peace. He's all for peace. And that's what's interesting about this. This is a little tangent from the digital transformation thing, but I want to get it off my chest, which is there is no just war. War is itself evil, and it always is based on lies. It's always serving power. It's always serving, it's never serving the people. And the Ukraine thing is all of the above. It's just wrong on every single level, and it's based on lies. It's for this digital transformation. There's nothing holy about the people that are dying. They don't make the ground holy, or there's nothing righteous about any of this. And to have David Gilmour, I mean, I've lost all respect for David Gilmour after watching this video and having him come out in support of war in the name of peace. This is like so Orwellian. War, we need to support the war effort in order to create peace. It's such a slap in the face of anything reasonable or just or ethical. And I know Roger Waters has spoken out against the Ukraine war, and unfortunately he doesn't understand the digital transformation and what this is all about. Maybe hopefully one day he'll get there. But anyway, so I wanted to just say something about the idea of, we need to promote peace by funding and aiding war. We promote peace by winning the war is totally not understanding what's actually happening. So anyways, I wanted to rant about David Gilmour for a second. Damn you, David. Why? I hope that he comes to realize how wrong he is. Okay. Let's go with another one.
Ukraine has got the unique experience of using technologies during the war. Another creative and efficient way to fight back is world's first IT army. Now there are about 250,000 participants. IT Army of Ukraine brings together both Ukrainian and international IT professionals. All cyber soldiers joined on a voluntary basis.
The war of the 21st century has turned into the first cyber war. Software engineers of Ukraine and the rest of the world have united into a great IT army. Their main goal is to spread the truth about the war. They created a Telegram channel to coordinate reports and instructions. On a weekly basis, IT Army attacks about 200 websites. During the first 3 days of its existence, the IT Army have shut down a number of critical government websites. After all independent media outlets were shut down, only propaganda media and TV channels remained in Russia. The most important of them is RuTube. The IT Army took down all of the propaganda TV channels in Russia and aired a single truthful broadcast about war in the Ukraine. On May 9th, the most important military holiday in Russia, live broadcasting was hacked and showed messages about war instead of program descriptions. On that day, RuTube was also shut down. Dozens of petabytes of information were deleted and the internal system was hacked as well. The IT army informs Russian mothers about their sons who lost their lives on the battlefield. Artificial intelligence recognizes the faces of abandoned Russian soldiers and finds their social media accounts. The army searches for relatives and notifies them of their death. We know names of all the looters. The IT army obtained databases of postal services they used to ship stolen goods from Belarus to Russia. Ukraine is showing the whole world that in the 21st century, the truth cannot be destroyed.
So this conflict in the Ukraine has some of the most extreme levels of disinformation and lies coming out of the Ukraine side, which is not to say that Russia's not doing their own lying about what's going on either. But Ukraine has been the propaganda campaign around this has been just over the top, and that whole thing of like an IT army. A lot of us who were involved with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in terms of activism encountered this with Israel, because you'd have these swarms of people that would just show up and just flood comment sections, in support of Israel, and totally, from a dishonest standpoint. So this actually, these armies of people came out of Israel, actually, initially. At least that's when I first encountered it. I'd never heard of it before that. But so they have an IT army, and I'm sure the Mossad and the Israeli government's actually helping with that, and Israeli companies as well. But again, this isn't just Israel. This is, it's bigger than that, but they're certainly a player.
The opportunity to stay connected in wartime is an important thing, and even the need for survival. In the very first day of war, we asked Elon Musk to help us. More than 12,000 Starlinks have arrived in Ukraine. We have been using them for support and restoration of the critical infrastructure.
Thousands of bombs have destroyed internet cables and cut off Ukrainians from access to information and each other. However, internet connection became faster and more reliable. Ukraine has received more than 10,000 Starlink stations, thanks to partners. Due to war in Ukraine, SpaceX has updated its software to use less energy. Starlink is now powered by a car's cigarette lighter. Starlink is supporting our key infrastructures, health facilities, financial institutions, energy plants. It has restored mobile connections in deoccupied Ukrainian towns and villages. Internet connection and mobile service are already available in Bordanka, Irpin, and Bucha. With just one Starlink station, the service was instantly re-established in 5 villages. Every day in Ukraine, about 150,000 people are actively using Starlink. Additionally, Ukrainian engineers are working hard during martial law every day. They risk their lives to restore connections, repair cables, and tower functions. Even in wartime, Ukraine stays always online.
So what better than a war to transition over into a entirely new infrastructure? And so Starlink, we put out a tweet and we asked Musk if he would help us, and he came in and helped us. I mean, come on, by design, guys. Okay, I just have one clip here from this event. It was called Ukraine 2030: Journey to a Green Transition, and that was from about a year ago. Anyways, I just have one clip from this.
It is really important to begin from understanding that Ukraine is one of the biggest markets outside of EU in the European continent, basically setting the trends for the transformation of the whole region, which is outside of EU, including those neighboring countries. So, and this is the reality we're in. And basically, Ukraine has one of the largest trade agreements with the European Union since the history of the association agreements itself.
So I just thought that was relevant, that they've got one of the largest trade agreements outside of the EU within the continent, and someone earlier talked about markets. We're one of the largest markets, but remember, these markets are manufactured. They're not organic. There's nothing natural or organic about any of this. It's all created, steered, and guided, and designed. It's yeah. So I had other clips that I just haven't gotten through, because I went through a lot of content here, and I know that I'm a little bit all over the place here, but I kind of wanted to at least put some of those ideas out there. And the main idea is just to think about the conflict in terms of digital transformation. And unfortunately, people are still not getting what all these big major events that are happening right now, what they're steering us into, what they're actually for. And so, again, please, I encourage you to learn more about cybernetics, about Web3, about smart contracts, about smart cities. And yeah. Hello, everybody. So yeah, listening to myself, I'm like, I think I'm getting a speech impediment. That's okay though. It gives me character. Yeah, I want to thank everyone for joining us. And yeah, so I wanted to bring Allison on, obviously, because a lot of this that I presented here, actually, she's done a lot of the groundwork on. But I really wanted to emphasize the role that the Ukraine war is playing in all of this, because again, the conversation when it comes to that isn't really addressing or dealing with the digital. I mean, the conversation anywhere isn't dealing with the with these issues. But Alice, did you want to, Allison? I know your name. Did you want to add some add some comments here after? Oh yeah, hold on 1 second. Let me. I think you might be muted on your side, because I've got your audio on. You want to just double check? And I will look over here to make sure there's nothing weird going on. Hang on. Let's see. I have your audio. Oh wait, let me see. Oh, hold on. Okay, now we're good. Sorry, Allison. I got you back here.
I know. I think you did a good job. I mean, I'm really glad that you knit it all together, because I hadn't really spent a lot of time. I knew a while back that it was a lot of digital stuff, but I hadn't spent time on it. So yeah, I think it's really important. And especially within the framework of war itself and the ends to which wars are used to advance larger policy objectives. And, for me, one of the things that I think is really hard in sort of navigating the quote unquote resistance. People are like, we need to have unity. We need to, move forward. But I don't think we all understand the circumstances the same way. And, I think because so much of the quote unquote, like the movement in people who are opposing what happened around the health events, really also, at least in the United States, sort of identify with a patriotic framework, right? I mean, that's sort of a big part of the narrative, is that, lots of people with like flags and things. And I've been emphasizing since the beginning that I feel like one of our key issues in addressing all of this is that, at least Americans, like, we don't understand who we are in all of this. Like, we're not quite prepared to have a reconciliation to actually look with clear eyes as to what we've been in the past and what we currently are, and the role that we play, and the nature of what it means to bring democracy places and what that is. And so it's really hard to have, to come to some sort of consensus about how to move forward, when for the most part, a lot of people really aren't they don't have a common understanding of what's going on. And,
Yeah.
and I think this just foregrounds that. Like, looking at Samantha Powers and Michael Froman up there, Ukraine is a test bed for this. I mean, yes, it's happening on a global scale, but we're not the good guys in this framework. Like we're not, it's opportunist, if not worse, for what's coming. These partnerships with Silicon Valley and Musk and this stuff, this is an opportunistic, parasitic problem that uses war to advance these programs. Right. And until we can kind of get our head around that, and we think somebody's doing something to us rather than like we're major players in it, we're not, people are not going to get it.
Yeah. When there's certain principles or values that are embedded in our supposed culture that I actually agree with in terms of freedom of speech and all these, these things that they put out there, but it just doesn't line up with the reality and the history. And so it's one of those challenges. And then on the flip side of it, you have conservative people that are trying to defend, the American ideal and the Constitution and make America great and all of that stuff. And then on the other side, you have this system is trying to weaponize the people that actually have legitimate concerns about our history and even our current situation in terms of police brutality or racism or inequality, just like the World Economic Forum, then UN SDGs, and there are embedded within their real legitimate problems. And so it's really a hard place to navigate, where you're given like, oh, which side are you on? And there's actually problems with both of these approaches. So I think it kind of leaves people a little bewildered, and it's getting people to understand that you can actually step outside of that dialectic, and you don't have to be attached to it,
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and I think this idea that, you mentioned about using, military engagements to test new technologies, right? To test new approaches to, and new weapons, right? And what I'm realizing more and more as we sort of dig deeper and deeper into, how things are weaponized on the home front, shall we say, like here, that these weapons are psychological, right? And a lot of it has to do with group psychology and this idea of teaming. And so I was just sort of thinking through about all of these, the connections to Ukraine and the way in which everyone was, it came on so strongly that this is the side you pick, right? This is the side you pick. And therefore, all of the things that flowed from that, like I know you mentioned like the crypto, but like the aid and all of the technologies. Now, if those similar things were coming from China, as you said, people would have a different feeling about it. But if what you can do is align people to a particular side that is a victim, and I'm not saying, I feel like the entire thing is a setup. So I as you do, I feel compassion for all those affected, because I don't think that this is a natural occurrence. This is something that's being used to advance a broader program, and it's terrible in that way. But if we, anything that you might have concerns about later, because we've been put on a team, the United States, and using these technologies to help, later on when they show up here, they'll say, well, wait a minute, you loved it when we could transfer money so fast to your favorite cause to buy, missiles for Ukraine, or we loved it when you could do remote work. They could do remote work, or we loved it when you could have Starlink, or those are all the good things. Remember, those were the things we did to help. And once this is all on a platform, this is what people aren't understanding, and what I saw through things like UNICEF, that you would start someplace and you would develop a small program and a platform and a pilot, and it would be linked to some sort of digital interface. And once you had a pilot, maybe you did some testing in a couple different places, you had the platform. You could just upload it to the cloud and it could be anywhere next week. Yeah. And so I think for the most part, again, that's the thing with the US, is that people, and I don't know, maybe it's changed since the lockdowns. People think, oh, my government wouldn't do that to us. The government wouldn't target us in that way. Although I think even the people who think that, okay, yeah, so now the government can target us that way, but it's something that was new, right? This just started to happen. And I'm like, no. For certain people, the government was always that way. And again, as you mentioned, it's not just the government, it's public-private partnership and all of that. But I'm saying this idea of weapons turning inward on domestic populations, right, is something, these weaponized platforms, it's not occurring to people that what happens in Ukraine and what it becomes normalized there will be here within 5 years' time. And I mean, they said that, right? Samantha Powers and Froman were like, oh, when do I get my thing here? When is it showing up in Washington? Oh, after Zambia.
Yeah.
Right.
And it's Samantha Power. I was making that same. I kept putting an S at the end of her name too. But I do see your.
One power, not two.
Yeah, she only has one power. I see your questions. We've got a few questions there. But I was just going to add one thing to what you just said, which is also like expanding the definition of what is a weapon. Because right. We've seen it in the social media space, how language is weaponized, how, and that's why, like I've been trying to like push back on the comment section and, in terms of like, hey, let's stay on this conversation. Cause I think that can be weaponized. You can just have a bunch of people jump into the space and then misdirect the conversation over here. When, we put out this information to have a discussion about it. So it's kind of rude, to it's either rude or deliberately misdirecting to do that. So I mean, it's really hard to operate because we want to be open and have everybody have these discussions. But I've seen just how the social media has been weaponized, and also like money itself. Like people don't think of money as a weapon, and this goes back to the whole thing. It's like, oh, it's just a tool. It's how you use it. And I've had debates with friends of mine around money. And that it actually is not value neutral, depending on how it's designed, who has the ability to issue it, and where it's directed. It actually, it has been and is a major steering mechanism, even before all these technological cybernetic iterations have come online. So yeah, what is a weapon?
Well, the money part too, I mean, the USAID, I mean, when I was looking into the education space, there's also development aid in the United Kingdom. Actually, Scandinavia is very involved. There's a lot of refugee programs in that area. And, I will say Raul's piece about Nigeria and the civil war, and then the entry point of humanitarian aid, also Canada, into that space, then created dependencies and abilities to nudge and steer those societies that ultimately set the stage for impact finance, right? And so, when Samantha Power is saying things like, oh yeah, structural adjustment, that was a problem, right? Oh, but now we've got microfinance, right? I mean, and the idea of debt, I thought that was a really important, point that you made about the debt. And in Raul's article too, he was saying that this is a long on-ramp, right, to cybernetic governance. And it started back, in the 60s, at least in the developing, when the World Bank started to get into social welfare programs, financing social welfare programs. And, just as you mentioned, the aid that was going to dislocated people from Ukraine, right? Now, they knew that was going to happen. And some of them were internally dislocated, and then some of them had been pushed to other countries. But those payments, those aid payments were what? They were conditional cash transfers. Now, again, I wrote an article a year or so ago looking into the origins of the conditional cash transfer program in Mexico in the 90s. And that was done with U.S. oversight, U.S. policy oversight. And, it's really frustrating to me to look at what's happening with, this central bank digital currency conversation. And it's happening disconnected from the idea of a conditional cash transfer program. It's disconnected from the aid conversation. It's disconnected from the IMF and World Bank. Not everyone, but most people, they just sort of imagine there's a bank for international settlements and it's the big boogeyman. And I'm like, there's a lot more going on, and it's not new. It's been happening for quite some time. And it's those conditional cash transfer. Oh, you can't access the benefit unless you've met your health requirements, which will expand into well-being and all the time health maintenance data streams. That's an important conversation. I just feel like when people just broad stroke the CBDC but hold on to my crypto because that's what I want as protection against the CBDC, you're missing what is MasterCard, for goodness sakes. I mean, MasterCard has its own impact fund.
Yeah, I had
Samantha
another.
Power, an ambassador. You know?
Yeah, I had another clip that I didn't actually get to from someone from Visa as well.
Yeah.
That was talking about Ukraine and their relationship and their partnership. So, yeah, I mean it's not just one thing, and we want to, our brains, we want to simplify it. Oh, it's this, and they're the ones, and yes, and I kind of pushed back on like. With you, I'm like, no, but CBDCs do play a role, but I totally agree with you that the narrative and the framing of it is way off, and it's not actually encapsulating the totality of the system. Just like with the Federal Reserve, like people are like, oh, it's just the Federal Reserve, and it's like, well, it's actually the Federal Reserve and the commercial banks and the government all kind of work together in this dance.
Right.
You know. Anyway, so I have a few questions here that people have put out here. So is UK RAIN, RAINE, a kind of petri dish for what is planned global? And I'm not really do you know what UK RAIN is?
You mean Ukraine?
Oh,
is it Ukraine?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry. UK
That's, I was like, okay. That's funny. We were talking about the Ukraine censorship. The whole video is about Ukraine. I don't think you need to worry about censoring. They already know that what this is about.
Yeah.
Is Ukraine kind of a petri dish for what is being planned global? What do you? I think it's in part. Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's numerous test beds, right? And again, so many of the technologies, the biometrics, the conditional payments, the facial recognition, all of that was piloted on earlier refugee people. So that was like, I was writing about that in 2018 on the Syrian refugees. And again, that's something that I I had one conversation with Vanessa Beeley back in the day before I knew all of the whatever, who was who and all the stuff. And I said, listen, like I need somebody who has a bigger voice than mine to talk about what's happening in Syria with the refugees and the ed tech and the surveillance and the MacArthur Foundation and these things. And of course, that never went anywhere because that wasn't going to go anywhere. But so these early, like I feel like the refugee settlements were the first test bed. And I've talked about that because again, it's pop-up culture. And again, you think about Vinay Gupta. He was involved in quote unquote humanitarian aid and this hexayurts. He was also, I don't know if he was totally connected to Visa, but he used to talk about your digital identity would be spackled together with microinsurance like Visa. And so all of this stuff has been bubbling up for at least probably 20 years. And then so you had the Syrian refugees, then of course you have Estonia, which is a smaller use case, and they're stepping it up, right? So then Ukraine would be the next step up, right? So now we've gone from a small country, go from refugee camps, which is a certain scale, to a small independent country, and then now Ukraine is significantly larger. So if they can integrate that into the economy, and of course because of the war, you've got the opportunity to do like the remote work, the reskilling. You've got the military tech that's legitimately embedded. Like you couldn't do the military tech necessarily in Estonia if what you're pretending that is about just digital government and efficiency. You couldn't get all the military stuff onto it too. So I feel like it's it is a petri dish, but it's not the first petri dish.
Well, I thought the comment by Samantha about, well, he asked, when is this coming to America? And she was kind of shrugged, and she was like, clearly like they would like to implement, I think they would love to implement this thing that they've implemented over there here, but there are a lot of obstacles because you have to deal with the population and all the different aspects of different agents within the system, right? And she was like, well, it'll come to, I can't remember what, Zambia, whatever she said first. Yeah. So I think too, what they're doing is, you have a country that's destroyed. So you've got free reign to do whatever you want. You can go into a lot of African nations that are severely underdeveloped, and you can actually build up from scratch. So I think that I do think that all these new technologies and these new systems are actually going to be developed and matured in, you know, poor nations and destroyed nations, rather than they'll come here later, I think, or at least it'll come here in a different form.
So I would point out, so Michael Froman with the MasterCard guy. So I saw him give a presentation a couple years ago at Georgetown. The launch was at Georgetown. So again, think Talhar Desjardins and Omega Point, right? And they were talking about, it was a launch of the public interest technology university network. And it was like Arizona State University was part of it, and a lot of the big schools. And so they were building out the data analysts. And in that, he was talking about the opportunity zones, right? And I remember distinctly hearing him say something like, well, we have this data, and so therefore we'll know where we need a grocery store or something in a community, which was the most bizarre thing, because you don't need credit card data to determine where a grocery store is. And unless, I mean, this was a couple of years ago, so it was before the lockdowns and grocery delivery really all happened.
Like, basic census would have done that.
Yeah, exactly. You don't need the credit card data to do that. But I think in the US, these opportunity zones, which I've talked about before, will be the test beds. And so those will be the areas that were redlined, that were, let to be drug infested, violence, and then clear it out and start over with new smart technologies linked to mixed use development, which will be the flow, right? The flow stuff. It's the kind of model I think that will come in. And so it's not going to be like they'll necessarily take over a whole state, immediately, but they'll start with these smaller bits. And then it's about, what can you make normal? What can you get people to agree to? And I feel like the synergy between the US populace feeling like a benefactor of people, victims of war, allow these technologies to become normalized to the point that when they show up on your back door, you're going to have been sort of inoculated to them. Like, oh yeah, that's the stuff we did with Ukraine. Okay, it's cool, right? So I think so much of this, I'm realizing, is about the story, and why it's so frustrating when I can say, look, they want to put people's food stamps on blockchain and manage it digitally, and nobody wants to talk about that, and then so by the time it shows up, people will just agree and be like, okay, well, everybody's on that, of course the food stamps would be on blockchain. That's just how we do it. And it's I don't know.
And then just increasing the need too. I was going to mention earlier about student debt. We were talking about debt, and I just, I have family members that are coming out of college with like this insane amount of debt, like that, they're starting off in life, or they're early in life, and they've already got this major burden. And I think that was by design. I think they're raising. And it's hard for people to wrap their mind. I don't know why people have such a hard time with that people would conspire to like raise, artificially raise prices of education, prices of food, prices like that. These aren't just natural market forces. These are deliberate manipulations that are creating this for a particular outcome. Even despite all the evidence, people just have a hard time, accepting that possibility. So,
well, people don't want to realize, I mean, it's this idea, they can't all be in on it, right? We can't all be on it. But I'm saying, if you can construct a consensus reality that makes a certain thing normal, yeah, we kind of are. Because if you agree to adopt and live inside that story, then yeah, you're in on it. You may not actively be like, oh, I got the memo.
You don't even know you're in on it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's such a part of the culture, and such a part of the economics, and all of this, the narrative, the stories have been around for so long. And yeah, you don't even, that was my thing with conspiracy. I'm like, the majority of people involved with the conspiracy don't even know that they're involved in conspiracy.
Well, and I mean, a lot of that too is like this cult of meritocracy that we have, right? And the experts, the cult, we've talked about that, and the credentialed people. So Samantha Power, I'm not sure if she went to Yale. She ran a policy institute at Harvard Kennedy School, right? So these people who are coming out of these elite Ivy League institutions, they're implementing all of these policies, and we're trained, many people, maybe not everybody, but to sort of look up to like, oh, wow, they have a degree from this place. They must know all the things. And then, she's so self-deprecating, like, oh, well, I have my corporate partners like dumb it down for me so I can figure it out. And I'm like, oh, give me a break. Like, they're sitting there acting like they don't know what they're doing when you're right. They totally know what they're doing. And did you know she was the U.S. ambassador to the UN?
I did know that. Yeah, I forgot to give a little bit of her background because, she was
important.
Yep. Yeah, it was very important. And then she was also, I first heard about her because she put out a book called A Problem from Hell. And I was really, at the time, I was really into the human rights world. And I kind of bought a lot of the narratives within that space, particularly around genocide. Although I've realized a lot of the genocide stories weren't exactly as we've been told in terms of like Rwanda, for example. Horrible tragedy, but it was actually a coup d'etat. But anyway, but I realized like, oh my gosh, this person is actually promoting humanitarian war. And that was like really nauseating to me. So she was, and then I found out like her husband is Sunstein or Susstein?
Yeah.
Susstein, who's been, he's also a big player in a lot of this. So
well, he's a behavioral economist. He's the nudge.
He's
the
nudge guy. Yeah.
And so, and he, and I think Froman and Power were all connected to the Obama administration transition. And so, I would just say, looking back, I sort of feel like at some point, like the Trump people are going to feel about Trump like the Obama people felt about Obama when they finally realized what was going on, right? They're like, we didn't know what that was.
And then after that, RFK Jr. Just kidding. I didn't say that. Don't leave.
Oh, gosh. But, yeah, so this idea of decision theory, and that's what I just want to emphasize about like all of the stuff they were talking about, the open source intelligence, the apps and getting the intel for the military and including the civilians as soldiers, right? So the civilian, like everyone can be a soldier, right? If you have the app. And you are very right, because I've heard of a lot of targeted people talking about coordination on these apps of like gang stalking type of stuff. But yeah, these apps can be, and even the feedback they were talking about, like, oh, you get responsive feedback from your government on these, the DIA app. Oh, we're going to float an idea by you and thumbs up, thumbs down, right? And like that's a real thing, they didn't already know what they were going to do, that your thumbs up, thumbs down like has a meaning. But this is moving towards the stuff about the betting markets in public policy, which is something I wrote about with Jeffrey Yass of Susquehanna International Group. I can't remember the name of the markets, but I mean, there are already betting markets on politics. Like there are these pools that go online and they bet on the outcomes of elections. But what Yass wants was to link free market economics into like tokenization and governance, right? And so this idea of what is money really, we might get closer with this idea of steering, but really it's a signal. It's these signals. And, I want to emphasize that if you listen to RFK Jr., he's all about the free market, which is kind of interesting from a democratic standpoint, that's his, of course it's, compared to crony capitalism, right? Like if there ever were actually a free market, it's sort of a false paradox, but it's an interesting position for him to take. And, what I was trying to say before in my critique is like the plan for these quote unquote free markets is this radical quote unquote democracy. I feel like everything needs air quotes, with tokens as this open signals intelligence towards an optimization metric. Like this is governance. This is cybernetic. So anyway.
Yeah, no, if people could just get that, if they could understand the cybernetic piece of it, the cybernetic governance, we could build up from there.
Yeah. People don't even know it's a thing they need to pay attention. Most, I mean, people who watch us do, but yeah.
Yeah, I think there's a handful of you guys out there, and we appreciate you.
Yes.
So I've got a few more questions here. It says, feel free not to respond. Do you also think this synthetic evolution is also the exact opposite of what should be a natural evolution? I think we should evolve into energy rather than repetition of a third dimensional cell. Wow, that was a serious question. Do you want to answer that, or? I don't think I can. I mean, I do.
I'm not sure that I believe in evolution the way we've been taught about evolution.
Mm.
I mean, if I want to go to that point, like I don't like yeah, I'm kind of I don't know, maybe this will be terrible. This will catch up with me later. But you know, there's the neo-Darwinian evolution and then the Lamarckian evolution and other stuff. And I'm like, I'm kind of open-ended on all of it. I know that I'm not that interested in being optimized by DARPA, you know, and the Bank of International Settlements. Do I think that there is some natural force driving us to dematerialize into energy? You know, for me, I'm much more grounded in, you know, not that I'm saying I'm entitled, you know, I'm not trying to adopt an indigenous worldview, but this idea of right relationships and relatives to the natural world. You know, and you could say, oh, it's all a simulation already, or it's all a game already, or it's all, you know, whatever. For where I'm at now, like I'm actually kind of fundamentally, I appreciate the spiritual aspect of this, but I'm kind of a materialist. So the idea of just sort of merging as energy I don't find appealing, but I don't have any proof one way or the other. I would just say I'm somewhat skeptical of the idea that there is a logical evolution to dematerialization. But.
Yeah. And to me, it's just, it's the way I frame it is artificial versus, you know, artificial synthetic versus natural organic, which even that it gets a little murky when you start to define those things. But yeah, definitely don't want DARPA or big banks and corporations guiding our evolution. And I also think, you know, looking at Neil Postman's discussions about technology and what we lose with technology. So like, oh, you gain a function with some sort of like technological advancement, but you also lose something in the process. So I think devolution
I guess I would also
is also a thing.
I mean, the idea that we may exist in different forms, right? And that this is an embodied form, and that there are things that you learn and experience in a body, right? That you wouldn't. So, you know, I'm not above the idea that maybe we exist as energy at some other point, or that we don't have access to that. But I feel like as in terms of feeling a responsibility to the natural world and the other beings here, to like shun the idea of the material in the aspiration of like an anthropocentric, like we're the top of the thing and we'll evolve into the other thing, unless we're thinking that all of nature is evolving into energy. I don't know. I feel like we're here for a purpose, and the purpose involves having a body. And for this, you know, I'm not interested in like just saying, oh, gross that we have a body and I hate it. I think it's interesting. I mean, for better or for worse. And I think there's something that comes after this too. So.
Yeah, to me, it's a big mystery, and I don't really know. I do think and feel that there's something more to our. I mean, there's something unexplainable about our consciousness and our being that definitely is not explained in the material. The material explanations are not sufficient for me, but I don't know what that is. And I'm very skeptical of pretty much all the mythologies that try to explain it. So I basically am like, I don't know. I do know that I'm you know, here. You know, I don't think this is all just you know, the ideas thrown out there that we're already living in, you know, synthetic reality, metaverse, whatever. I don't believe that. I think we are there is something physical, but I think they like to promote that idea because they're trying to shift us into that, and so they're trying to make that idea acceptable. But yeah, I'm kind of with you. Like, I'm here now, I know that, and I do think that there's something that drives me around, you know, seeing things. I'm like, no, that's not right. We shouldn't do that. Like, I'm with you. I'm with you on that for sure. Is there a good book out there about the Macy conferences? Guess it was a hotel name, the Macy conferences.
Yeah,
I and Wiener.
Yeah, I thought I actually found the hotel, but I went to the wrong one. So it was actually on the.
I thought it was a department store. I didn't know.
Yeah, amazing, right? You know, for me, I haven't read a book about the Macy. I haven't, but there is a good website that lists all of the people there. And the way I like to do research is I make these maps, and so I've kind of mapped out the Macy conferences, and to look at who all the individuals were and then research them and sort of see what they're attached to, both before they were at the Macy conferences and then after. And then, my map includes, and then it goes over to Tavistock and, again, the military, right? Military mind control stuff. So I don't have a specific book recommendation, but, I can post a link underneath to the Macy conferences, like the list. And to me, that's what I like to look and see who was in the room. And this website is pretty detailed in that respect.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered a lot, but I'm thank you for coming on here with me. And
let me just see if I have anything else to say.
Yes, please.
Okay,
and if anybody else has any final questions,
all right. I just want to mention, the open source intelligence was really important. And the use, I thought it was really interesting that they kept referring back to the fact that they were always referencing people's social media, right? Oh, there's a dead soldier. Let's check the social media. Oh, we want to figure out if there's some confirmation of the guy. Let's check the social media. I thought that was a really important thing, that they were just so upfront about it.
Well, also, I want to say something about that too, because all these discussions around digital ID have been, the government's going to issue a digital ID, and you're going to have your government ID, and I'm like, that's only one piece of it. Like they're setting a ubiquitous computing system up where your digital ID is going to be your friends, it's going to be your social media, it's going to be your credit score, it's going to be your actual physical walking around through facial recognition, and it's going to be all these different things that are going to verify who you are and where you're at. It's not going to be one thing, it's going to be a whole multitude of things that are then connected, and then the algorithm pieces all these things together. I think it's way more complicated and sophisticated than people realize. It's not just like, I'm going to refuse the digital ID. It's like, no, if you have a digital footprint, you have a digital ID. Your digital ID is already in your SIM card. It's already in your, it's in your social, it's in every account that you've ever created with any app or anything, so interoperability, guys, that's a very important word to wrap your mind around.
Well, and I would just say the last thing I wanted to say is, as your digital identity, and I think that this relates to Ukraine, is in the rebuilding, is clearly they're interested in the finance markets, right? And all of the things that got destroyed, there will be investments to rebuild, right? And then some of those investments will be large scale, but then some of them will be into individuals, right? To reskill them for the new jobs. To start up quote unquote small businesses or to be entrepreneurs. Now, a lot of these entrepreneurial jobs will be data analytics or something like that. But this idea that we could, zoom money.
It's called
over
public goods.
Right. Well, that's it. So public interest technology, right? Like that's what Froman is doing. They're setting up the quote unquote public goods. And so, but people like Andreessen Horowitz, like they would be investing in people. Using Web3 technologies, and there would be like income sharing agreements. I know you've spending a lot of time looking at the Arizona State University Global Silicon Valley conferences.
Yeah, I got some stuff coming out.
Yeah, these digital things will be applied. So the microfinance, sure, they're doing it for women who run small corner stores in Tanzania maybe, but then they're also going to be using the same infrastructure to do sort of garnished wages and income sharing for like a returning dislocated person who comes back home and wants to start up a software company. So all of these kinds of technological investments are being precipitated, and MasterCard has a huge impact fund, right? That's what Froman was talking about with the public interest technology. And I just want to emphasize is that the impact space relies on breaking things. It literally relies on making things terrible. So any minor improvement counts as an impact. Right. And so, I saw that in the schools, you mess things up and you wreck everything, and then you measure it, and then you let it get a little better. And so this whole idea of war and poverty and displacement and misery comes with this idea of what works government and social impact, that it's making things better, is ridiculous, because it depends on like you clearing house, making tragedies, leveling homes, all of that first. And if you make money on that, you're just going to keep repeating the cycle.
Yeah, you're not.
And
You're,
so-
if you incentivize something, you're going to get more of that something. And this isn't this isn't rocket science. This is like duh. It's a no brainer. And so yeah, and it's interesting too. The social impact space. It's really this marriage of capitalism and like socialism and philanthropy. It's like this.
It's token engineering.
Right.
And the token engineering is the cybernetics, and this app, the DIA app, is the new government. And I was talking about that in the fall of 2020. I was talking about it more in the lines of Estonia and Israel and the SNAP benefits, but I just don't think people have really still quite caught up on what it means. I mean, if they did, like, people would be up in arms in Texas about their blockchain programs, but meanwhile they're just waving in crypto and pretending like it's all good. It's kind of weird.
Yeah. Well, next month is the 3-year anniversary of when I drove out and first interviewed you. So it's been quite a journey. We'll have to do a little party. Yeah. But yeah, it's been quite a ride. I have another question here. Is the WEF's preoccupation with cyber attacks a clear indication that it will be inevitable? I see the internet as a MIC creation, and likely capable of manipulation, big cyber attacks. Certainly possible. I mean, I think
extended reality is totally hackable. I mean, all of it is. The web, like all of it is. Like, why would we create a world that could just wreck at any moment? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Why would you substitute the real world for a world that could be hacked all the time? So, yeah, because then we'll all either have to build extended reality or defend it.
Yeah.
Like, there will be no playwrights, nobody doing any real work anymore. It'll just be, everybody will just be cyber soldiers and voting on our app, voting on apps and being cyber soldiers, right? And being like, doing ant computer behaviors or something. And
well, there's a time when I'm like, there's no way, like, human beings, they're going to push back against once they get into this. But, when I saw how easily kind of people fell into a lot of the things that came out of the last 3 years in terms of having to stay home, having to do more stuff on your computer, stuff that actually genuinely goes against, like, I think our better nature of like what we aspire, how we aspire to live. At this point, I guess anything's possible. I don't know. I mean, within a generation, who knows what they can convert humanity into.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think hacking is all part of it, but they, we're not stopping to ask, like, why do we want to live in that kind of world, right? I mean, I did a little recording with Lynn a couple days ago when we were talking about cyberbullying and just, I'm just navigating, I mean, not horrible, but just like unnecessary grossness online. It's not a pleasant place to be, and so why would we build a world that brings this out in everyone? And then why would we put children into a world like that and like make them go to school there? None of these things actually make sense if we stop to think about it. But yeah.
Well, great. Well, do you have any streams coming up this week or anything scheduled?
Depends on if I get mad. I'm working on Lynn's quilt. I'm almost I'm gonna get that done first. So cool. We'll see.
Well, thank you for joining me, and thank you everyone who chimed in on the chat and stuck with us. And I've got some stuff.
If you're watching this over on my channel, because I'm gonna put the little commenty part, the second half. I would like for everybody to subscribe to Jason's channel because he's got a lot more stuff coming up, and I'll put the link to it underneath on my channel. So
yeah, there's a thing called, and Allison is already very familiar with this because it deals with education, but it's called the Global Silicon Valley. It's actually a merchant bank, and but they're tied in with ASU, Arizona State University, which is kind of on the leading edge of a lot of these technologies, and is run. The head of it is Michael Crow, who is Mr. CIA guy. So they just put out, I mean, they just kept putting them out, and I was like, I went through and I just started grabbing little clips here and there, and then they just kept putting them out. So I've got like, I'm probably going to do several shows on some of those clips that I gathered. So stay tuned. So thank you all.